My first tip for targeting big perch is to have an idea of the tactics that you're going to be using on the day. So some tactics I have in mind for searching for fish, and then some tactics I use when I've found a shoulder fish and I've been using the searching tactics to find them, and then the bites start to dry off, and that's when I'll try something like a finesse tactic. So searching tactics, these are lures and lure tactics that you can use to cover lots of water quickly and efficiently, finding shoals of perch. So one of those tactics would be using a crankbait. So I've got a deep diving crankbait like this Salmo bullhead. I can cast out, give the reel 2 or 3 quick turns just to get the lure down, and then ideally you want the bill banging along the bottom. What this will do is it will stir up the bottom and also create lots of vibration and movement, and it can be a fantastic method for searching for perch. Spinnerbaits can work really well as well. They've got tons of flash, lots of movement and lots of vibration too. Everything you could really ask for in a lure, especially when they have a trailer added to them. Chatterbaits, they've also got a big profile as well. They can work really well for big perch, even in the bigger sizes too. And then jigging, you know, rigging up a soft bait like a shad, a curltail, a creature bait, and just hopping it along the bottom can work really well even on the toughest of days. Now once I've found a shoulder fish and I've caught a couple, and then I might start to not get so many bites and the bites start to dry off, that's when I'll switch to a finesse tactic. So I might try something like a drop shot rig, something that I can cast out and crawl back very, very slowly, giving the fish plenty of time to see the lure, and that can be a brilliant tactic. Something else I might consider using is a chub rig with the articulated weight at the front of the lure, and just crawl that slowly along the bottom as well, giving it tiny little hops, using different types of soft baits. Or I can simply scale down the size of my lure, so I can fish a smaller lure and that might get me more bites instead. So just have an idea of what tactics you're going to use before you go fishing, and hopefully that will help you out on the day. My second tip for targeting big perch is about drop shotting, which is one of my favourite tactics when I'm fishing very pressured venues and where I've found a shoulder fish using one of the searching tactics I described, and I'm not getting so many bites, and that's when I often switch to a drop shot rig. But I still see a lot of people having a really long distance between the hook and the drop weight. I'm talking sort of 12 to 18 inches. Now that's okay if you're fishing like on a reservoir or a lake and you're fishing out at long range, where if you're casting out a long way, if you can imagine the drop weight on the bottom like this and the line on an angle, then the soft bait is actually not going to be far away from the bottom. But if you're fishing vertically, or you're fishing on a small canal or a river, and you've got a distance between the hook and the drop weight, which is between 12 and 18 inches, then your soft bait is going to be a long way off the bottom. Now that's okay when the fish are really active, but when they're not active on a day like today, I mean it's freezing cold, it's bright and sunny, not great conditions, you need to be fishing closer to the bottom. So most of the time when I'm drop shotting on a river or a canal, I have a distance of about 6 to 9 inches between the hook and the drop weight. And that's a nice distance then, because when I'm casting out sort of, you know, the width of the canal behind me, the soft bait or the drop shot fly, which I've got on here, is going to be pretty close to the bottom. So when fishing on shallower venues, try not to have such a long distance from your soft bait to the drop weight. As I say, about 6 to 9 inches is what I prefer. My third tip for targeting big perch is regarding lure size. So for most of my big perch fishing, I tend to use a lure size of between 2.5 to 4 inches, so that's about 6 to 10 centimetres. That's the kind of size I would tend to use for targeting perch of over £2 or over sort of 35 centimetres and upwards. I could probably use smaller lures and catch more fish, and I could even use bigger lures, so lures over 4 inches up to sort of 5.5 inches for targeting perch, but I wouldn't catch so many. So my favourite size is between 2.5 to 4 inches for giving myself a pretty good chance of catching a big fish. My fourth tip for targeting big perch on lures is choosing the right weight to match to the soft bait that you're using. So some soft baits need a certain amount of weight to get the tails moving, and you need to match the correct weight to the soft bait so that it gives the fish plenty of time to see the lure as the lure's falling through the water. You don't want to use a weight that's too light so that the paddle tail, for example, isn't swimming properly, but you don't want to use a weight that's too heavy so that when you cast out, the lure falls through the water so quickly that it doesn't give the fish enough time to see the lure properly. So it's all about getting the balance really and matching the right weight to the size of the soft bait and the action of that soft bait. My fifth tip for targeting big perch is what to do if a big fish follows you in. Now, on a lot of my local venues, rivers, lakes, canals, this can happen quite often, and it's quite an exciting thing if a big perch does follow you in, but you need to keep calm. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're using something like a jig or a sinking lure, let the lure fall to the bottom. Don't lift the lure out of the water, and leave the lure on the bottom completely motionless. So I'll retrieve all the way back to my feet and then just leave the lure on the bottom. Now, a lot of the time what will happen is that the perch will eye up the lure for quite a long time. I've had fish look at the lure for up to 5 minutes at times before they've actually taken the lure. Sometimes if the fish starts to move away, you can give the lure a very small twitch and that will just catch the fish's interest again. Or if you're using a floating lure, something like a floating crankbait, obviously if a big fish follows you in, if you're using a floating crankbait and you pause the lure, the crankbait's going to float up to the surface. Now, on some occasions when the fish are really fired up, the fish will actually follow the crankbait up to the surface and take the lure off the top, which is a very exciting thing. But a lot of the time they will just swim away. Now, what I would do is get the crankbait in, quickly change lure, probably to a jig, and cast back out to wherever that fish swam off and hop the jig along the bottom and hope that it either comes back or takes it before the lure reaches the bank again.